The first time the man noticed the silence, he mistook it for peace. His name was Elias, and for most of his life, he had been known as a good man. Not a loud man. Not a scandalous one. The kind who nodded during sermons, who folded his hands the right way, who bowed his head when others did. He prayed every night. At least, that's what he told himself. The prayers had become short over the years, efficient, quiet, clean. No tears. No wrestling. Just words said correctly, like keys turned in a familiar lock. "Thank you for today," he would whisper. "Forgive me where I failed. I will do better tomorrow." Tomorrow was always there to lean on. The church bell rang every morning from the hill above the town, its sound drifting gently through Elias's window. Once, years ago, that bell had made his chest ache. It had reminded him of something burning and alive inside him, something that wanted all of him, not just the parts he had set aside. But that ache faded. And the bell became background noise. One evening, as dusk bled into night, Elias lingered in the church longer than usual. The others had already left. Candles flickered low, casting shadows that stretched and twisted along the stone walls. He sat alone in the pew. "I should pray," he thought. But his mind was tired. His body was comfortable. And tomorrow, he reasoned, would be quieter. Better. As he stood to leave, he noticed someone near the altar. An old man. Elias was certain he hadn't been there moments before. The man wore simple clothes, no rank, no ornament, but his posture was straight, his presence heavy in a way Elias couldn't explain. "You're leaving early," the old man said. Elias forced a polite smile. "I've prayed enough for today." The man turned, and his eyes were not unkind, but they were sharp. "Enough for what?" he asked. Elias hesitated. "Enough to remain faithful." The old man nodded slowly. Faithful to whom? The question unsettled him. To God, of course. Elias remained on his knees long after the bell's echo dissolved into the stone. He waited for warmth. For reassurance. For the familiar sense that his prayer had been received, recorded, filed away like always. Nothing came. Not emptiness, worse than that. Stillness. The candles burned without flicker. The church did not feel abandoned, but it felt distant. As if heaven were listening from another room, not refusing to hear, simply no longer leaning close. Elias pressed his forehead to the floor. "Lord," he whispered, louder now, "I am here." The words sounded thin. He waited for the old man to return. He did not. When Elias finally stood, his legs shook, not with fear, but with the unsettling realization that something had changed direction inside him. For years, he had approached God carefully, politely, keeping parts of himself in reserve. Now that reserve felt exposed, useless. Outside, the sky had begun to pale. Morning was coming whether he was ready or not. The days that followed were uncomfortable. Elias prayed longer, but the prayers felt clumsy. Unrehearsed. He found himself distracted not by the world, but by memories, moments when he had felt the pull to forgive and delayed, to give and hesitated, to speak truth and stayed quiet. Each memory arrived with the same phrase attached to it. Later. At night, sleep came poorly. And when it did, the dreams returned. The door again. The line of souls again. But this time, Elias noticed something he hadn't before. None of them were panicking. They spoke softly. Reasonably. We were good people. We believed. We meant well. And each held the same thing in their hands, keys that no longer fit. Elias woke with tears already on his face. One evening, as he left the church, he saw a woman sitting on the steps. Poorly dressed. Head bowed. He hesitated. Tomorrow, the old instinct whispered. You're tired. Someone else will help. His chest tightened painfully. He stopped. Are you hungry? He asked. The woman looked up, startled. Then nodded. The moment was small. Almost insignificant. But something broke open inside him anyway. As Elias walked home later, he understood with sudden clarity what the old man had meant. Delay had not been neutral. It had been shaping him. Training him. And every time he chose now instead of later, it felt like waking a limb long thought dead, painful, awkward, but alive. Weeks passed. Elias became less efficient in his prayers, and more honest. Less composed, and more present. He began to notice how often God had been speaking all along, not loudly, but persistently, waiting for urgency he had never offered. One night, the old man returned. Not in the church. But in the dream. You are learning, the man said. I'm afraid, Elias replied. The man nodded. Good. Fear reminds you that time is real. Will the door open? Elias asked. The old man looked at him, not with certainty, but with truth. It opens to those who stop rehearsing faith, and start surrendering. Elias woke before dawn. The bell rang. And this time, he was already on his feet. The test did not come in the way Elias expected. It did not arrive with a vision, or a voice, or a holy stillness that announced itself as important. It came disguised as interruption. It was late afternoon when a boy knocked on Elias's door, thin, out of breath, eyes wide with urgency. Sir, the boy said, my father, he collapsed near the olive press. They say he's asking for you. Elias froze. The man the boy spoke of was Mateo, a neighbor Elias had avoided for years. Bitter, sharp-tongued, openly resentful of the church. They had argued once, long ago, and Elias had never returned to make peace. He had always told himself there would be time. That wounds cooled on their own. The familiar thought rose instantly. Tomorrow. Elias felt it clearly now, how natural it felt, how practiced, how convincing. His cloak hung by the door. The road would be muddy. Evening prayers were approaching. Someone else could go. His heart began to pound. The old man's voice echoed in memory. Delay is not neutral. Elias reached for his cloak. The olive press was quiet when he arrived, the air heavy with oil and dust. Mateo lay on the ground, pale, breathing shallowly. A few men stood nearby, unsure what to do. When Mateo saw Elias, his eyes narrowed weakly. You, he rasped. I didn't expect you. Elias knelt without thinking. Neither did I. There was a long pause. Then Mateo laughed, a dry, bitter sound that ended in a cough. I always thought you were a good man, Mateo said. Too good to get your hands dirty. The words stung because they were true. Elias swallowed. I was afraid, he said simply. Mateo turned his head slightly. Of what? Of being wrong, Elias replied. Of being uncomfortable. Of needing forgiveness as much as you. Mateo's expression shifted, not softened, but tired. "You came anyway," he said. "Yes," Elias answered. "Because I don't want to arrive too late anymore." Silence stretched between them. Not hostile. Heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Matteo spoke. "Pray for me," he said. "Not later. Now." Elias placed his hand over Matteo's chest. And for the first time in his life, he did not measure his words. He prayed like a man who knew this moment would never come again. The weeks that followed were quieter, not because life had slowed, but because Elias no longer filled the silence with excuses. He still rose early. He still worked. He still walked the same stone roads beneath the same sky. But something essential had shifted. Time no longer felt like a possession he could spend carelessly. It felt like a gift placed in his hands each morning, fragile and exact. Elias began to notice moments he once ignored. A harsh word that needed stopping before it escaped. A kindness that could not wait for better timing. A truth that asked to be spoken now, not polished later. He did not always succeed. But he no longer delayed obedience in the name of intention. One evening, as dusk settled, Elias returned to the church alone. The candles were low, the air cool. He knelt where he had knelt before, but this time, he did not wait for a sign. "Lord," he said quietly, "I am here." And this time, the words did not feel thin. No vision came. No old man appeared. But the silence was different now, not distant, not closed. It felt attentive. Near. Elias understood then that God had never stopped listening. It was he who had been speaking as if love could be scheduled. The bell rang once. Elias smiled, not with relief, but with resolve. When he left the church, the door closed behind him with a simple, solid sound. Not final. Not threatening. Just real. He walked into the dark streets unafraid. Because the prayer he once saved for later had finally arrived on time. Elias did not change because he learned something new. He changed because he stopped waiting. Most people do not lose their souls in rebellion. They lose them in delay. In prayers postponed. In forgiveness scheduled. In obedience negotiated. The most dangerous lie is not, "There is no God." It is, "There will be time." If this story reached you, it is not by accident. Because the door is still open. The moment is still alive. It is for now. And the call is not for tomorrow.